Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into something that challenges everything you thought you knew about strength, about power, about what the human body is truly capable of achieving. We're talking about Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, beings who walked the earth alongside our ancestors and possessed bodies that make modern Olympic athletes look fragile in comparison. Before we begin this journey through Ice Age anatomy, take a moment to hit that like button if you enjoy deep dives into human evolution, and subscribe if you want more content exploring the mysteries of our ancient past. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what aspect of Neanderthal biology fascinates you most. Your engagement helps this channel grow and lets me know what topics resonate with you. Now, get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights, let that familiar background hum wash over you as we ease into tonight's exploration of biological engineering at its most impressive. When you picture a Neanderthal, what comes to mind? For decades, popular culture painted them as brutish, slouching cave dwellers, barely more sophisticated than apes. But the truth revealed by modern science tells a far different, far more fascinating story. Neanderthals weren't failed experiments in human evolution. They were supremely adapted survivors who thrived in some of the harshest environments Earth has ever known, and they did so with bodies that were, quite simply, built different. We're talking about individuals who could generate forces we can barely comprehend, who could sprint with explosive power, who could hunt and kill megafauna with nothing but wooden spears and raw physical strength. These weren't bumbling proto-humans. These were apex predators, power athletes, living engines of force and fury wrapped in stocky muscular frames that had been honed by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in glacial Europe. Tonight, we're going to break down exactly what made Neanderthal bodies so extraordinarily powerful. We'll examine four crucial systems, four interconnected marvels of biological engineering that worked in harmony to create one of the most physically capable beings ever to walk this planet. We'll look at their skeletal fortress, bones denser and thicker than anything we possess today. We'll explore their muscular engine, attachment sites and fibre compositions that speak to strength we've lost. We'll investigate their metabolic furnace, the energy systems that powered these incredible bodies through frozen winters and dangerous hunts. And finally, we'll analyse their hunting machine, the biomechanical perfection that made them lethal predators. By the end of tonight, you'll understand not just how powerful Neanderthals were, but why they needed to be, what it cost them, and what lessons their bodies still have to teach us about human potential and adaptation. This is a story written in fossil bones and genetic code, in isotope signatures and fracture patterns, in the very architecture of what it means to be strong. So let's begin where all strength originates, with the foundation upon which all power is built. Section 1. The Skeletal Fortress. Bones built for power. If you want to understand Neanderthal strength, you have to start with their skeletons, not the bleached white fossils you see in museums, carefully arranged and labelled behind glass, but the living bones that these beings carried through their dangerous lives. Bones that weren't just passive frameworks, but dynamic structures that grew and remodelled themselves in response to incredible forces, that absorbed impacts that would shatter modern human limbs, that served as anchors for muscles powerful enough to bring down prey that outweighed them by hundreds of pounds. The Neanderthal skeleton represents something we've largely lost in modern humanity. A recent study that examined trabecular bone density across millions of years of human evolution made a startling discovery. The researchers used high-resolution CT scanning to measure the density of spongy bone inside the joints of modern humans, chimpanzees and fossil hominins spanning several million years. What they found challenges everything we thought we knew about human skeletal evolution. Neanderthals and early modern humans retained high trabecular density, similar to that found in earlier hominins and even in chimpanzees, but recent modern humans, those of us living today, and our immediate ancestors over the past 12,000 years, show dramatically lower bone density throughout our limbs. We're talking about a difference so stark that Neanderthal bone density values were more than 5 standard deviations above the modern human mean. Think about what that means. More than 5 standard deviations. In statistical terms, that's the difference between average and extraordinarily exceptional. That's the kind of number that makes scientists double-check their equipment. This wasn't a gradual trend throughout human evolution. For millions of years, from Australopithecus through Homo erectus, through Neanderthals and into early Homo sapiens, our ancestors maintained dense, robust skeletons. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something changed. Modern human skeletons became lighter, more gracile, losing roughly 40% of their bone mass and strength. Most of that loss has occurred in just the past 1,000 years. The implications are profound. Neanderthals weren't just slightly more robust than us. They possessed fundamentally different skeletal architecture, bones that modern science confirms could handle loads we simply cannot. When researchers compared the lower limb bones of Neanderthals to those of modern humans from various time periods, they found that Neanderthal hip joints, knee joints, and ankle joints consistently showed bone densities comparable to those of chimpanzees and early hominins, all species that lived far, more physically demanding lives than modern humans. But density is only part of the story. The actual shape and structure of Neanderthal bones reveals even more about their extraordinary power. The examination of specific fossil specimens provides concrete examples of this robusticity. The La Chapelle-aux-Saints skeleton, discovered in France in 1908, offers one of the most complete Neanderthal skeletons ever found. This individual, an older male who lived around 50,000 years ago, shows the characteristic thick limb bones, enlarged joint surfaces, and pronounced muscle attachment sites that define Neanderthal anatomy. Despite suffering from arthritis and other age-related conditions, the skeleton demonstrates the fundamental robusticity that characterized these beings throughout their lives. Similarly, the Kabaratu skeleton from Israel, dating to about 60,000 years ago, preserves an exceptional pelvis and spine. The vertebral bodies, those drum-shaped bones that stack to form the spine, are noticeably thicker than those of modern humans of comparable stature. The spinous and transverse processes, those projections where back muscles attach, are more pronounced, suggesting powerful spinal musculature. The pelvis is remarkably broad, particularly in the biiliac breadth, the distance between the outer edges of the hip bones. From Shanidar Cave in Iraq, we have multiple Neanderthal specimens including Shanidar III, whose ribcage has been the subject of detailed study. Virtual reconstruction of this individual's thoracic skeleton confirmed the bell-shaped configuration, with ribs that curve differently than those of modern humans, creating that distinctive wide lower chest. The rib bones themselves are thicker, with more prominent grooves on their undersurfaces where blood vessels and nerves run, suggesting robust blood supply to the chest wall musculature. The Amud I skeleton from Israel represents one of the largest Neanderthals ever discovered, with an estimated height of around 178 centimeters, tall for a Neanderthal. Yet despite this height, the individual retains the characteristic stocky proportions, with limb bones that are absolutely massive. The femur, the thigh bone, has a shaft diameter that exceeds most modern human femora, and the cortical bone, that dense outer shell of the bone shaft, is substantially thicker. These individual specimens aren't outliers. They represent the norm for Neanderthals. When researchers compile measurements across the entire known Neanderthal fossil record, from specimens scattered across Europe and Western Asia, the pattern remains consistent. Robust skeletons, thick bones, enlarged joint surfaces, pronounced muscle attachments. This wasn't variation within the species, this was the species. Consider their limb proportions. Neanderthals had shorter limbs relative to their torso than modern humans, with the shortening particularly pronounced in the lower leg. The tibia and fibula, those two bones between your knee and ankle, were proportionally shorter and thicker in Neanderthals than in us. At first glance, this might seem like a disadvantage. Shorter legs mean shorter stride length, which conventional wisdom suggests would make you slower. But biomechanics doesn't work that simply. Those shorter, thicker lower legs gave Neanderthals something more valuable than top speed. They gave them explosive acceleration and power. Modern studies of sprinters have found that the best short-distance runners tend to have shorter lower legs and longer toes. The shorter lower leg allows for more efficient transfer of muscular force into acceleration, while the longer toes keep the foot in contact with the ground longer during the push-off phase, generating more power. Neanderthals had both adaptations. Their lower legs were short and thick, packed with attachment sites for massive muscles. Their toes were long, creating extended push-off periods. The heel bones, the calcaneus, were consistently longer in Neanderthals than in modern humans. This meant their Achilles tendon, that thick cord running from heel to calf that acts like a biological spring in distance runners, was also longer. But here's the thing, a longer Achilles tendon is less efficient at storing and releasing energy for endurance running. It's better suited for delivering powerful, explosive contractions over short distances. The entire lower body of a Neanderthal was essentially a biological cannon designed to generate short bursts of tremendous force. Not for running down prey across open savanna like our Homo sapiens ancestors did in Africa, but for explosive sprints across broken terrain, for sudden charges during ambush hunts, for powerful uphill climbs through the mountainous landscapes of Ice Age Europe. Let's move up to the pelvis and lower torso. The Neanderthal pelvis was remarkably broad, significantly wider than that of modern humans of comparable height. Measurements of the biiliac breadth, the width across the hip bones, consistently show values that would be considered exceptionally wide in modern populations. This created a wider base of support, enhancing stability during powerful movements. A wide pelvis also meant the hip muscles had better leverage for generating force. The gluteus medius and minimus, those muscles on the side of your hip that stabilize your pelvis when you stand on one leg, attach to the outer surface of the ilium, the large flaring bone of the pelvis. A wider pelvis means these muscles have a longer lever arm, allowing them to generate more stabilizing force with less muscular effort, or alternatively, allowing them to generate tremendous stabilizing force when maximum effort is applied. When you're trying to power through difficult terrain or stabilize yourself during the violent final moments of a hunt, that extra pelvic width becomes a crucial advantage. The shape of the Neanderthal pelvis differed in other ways as well. The pubic bones, those bones at the front of the pelvis, were longer in Neanderthals than in modern humans. This elongated pubic ramus, as it's technically called, has been the subject of much research. Some scientists have suggested this might relate to birthing mechanics, providing more room for the birth canal to accommodate large-headed Neanderthal infants. Others have proposed biomechanical explanations related to how forces are transmitted through the pelvis during locomotion. The function remains debated, but the morphology is clear. Neanderthal pelvises were built differently than ours. The sacrum, that triangular bone at the base of the spine that connects to the pelvis, also shows distinctive features in Neanderthals. It's more robust, with thicker bone and larger articulation surfaces where it joins to the iliac bones. This sacroiliac joint, where spine meets pelvis, is one of the most important force transmission points in the human body. Every step you take, every time you jump or land, forces travel through this joint. A more robust sacroiliac joint can handle higher loads without damage. The ribcage tells an equally fascinating story. Neanderthals had what scientists call a bell-shaped thorax. Instead of the more barrel-shaped or cylindrical ribcage of modern humans, the Neanderthal chest was wider at the bottom than at the top, with ribs that were longer and more horizontally oriented. Recent virtual reconstructions of Neanderthal specimens like Shanidar III from Iraq and Kabara II from Israel have confirmed this distinctive configuration across different geographic populations. The ribs themselves warrant detailed examination. Neanderthal ribs are thicker than modern human ribs, with more substantial bone tissue. The angle at which they project from the spine differs, creating that flared lower chest. The costal cartilages, those flexible connectors between ribs and sternum, though not preserved in fossils, must have been quite robust to support this architecture. This thoracic shape wasn't just aesthetic, it had significant functional implications for multiple body systems. This bell-shaped thorax had multiple functional implications. First, it housed a larger respiratory system. The lungs of a Neanderthal were almost certainly bigger than ours, with greater capacity for oxygen intake and processing. The volume contained within that expanded ribcage, based on virtual reconstructions, exceeded modern human thoracic volume, even when controlling for overall body size. Computational fluid dynamics studies of Neanderthal nasal cavities and respiratory passages suggest they could move significantly more air volume than modern humans. This wasn't just about better endurance, though that certainly helped. It was about fueling a metabolism that ran hot, about delivering oxygen to massive muscles during intense exertion, about surviving in thin, cold air where every breath had to count. The horizontal orientation of the ribs also affected core mechanics. The core muscles, those sheets of abdominal and back muscles that transfer force between upper and lower body, had different attachment angles on the Neanderthal skeleton. The external obliques, internal obliques, and transversus abdominis, those layered muscles wrapping around your sides and front, attached to the lower ribs and the iliac crest of the pelvis. In Neanderthals, the angle between these attachment points, determined by the rib orientation and the wide pelvis, would have been different than in modern humans. This likely gave them enhanced rotational power, crucial for the twisting, thrusting movements involved in their hunting techniques. The diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle, separating chest from abdomen and driving respiration, also would have been affected by thoracic shape. A wider, more flared lower rib cage provides a different attachment geometry for the diaphragm. Whether this made Neanderthal breathing mechanics more or less efficient than ours is difficult to determine, but it certainly made them different. The diaphragm is the most important breathing muscle, responsible for about 70 to 80% of the work of respiration during quiet breathing. Any changes to its attachment geometry would have had significant effects on how Neanderthals breathed. But perhaps the most revealing aspects of Neanderthal skeletal power come from examining their joint surfaces. Every place where two bones meet, every elbow, every knee, every knuckle, tells a story about the forces those bones experienced during life. Neanderthal joint surfaces are consistently larger, relative to body size, than those of modern humans. Larger joint surfaces distribute load across more area, reducing pressure per square inch and allowing the skeleton to handle greater total forces without damage. The biomechanics here are straightforward. If you have two bones meeting at a joint, and forces are being transmitted through that joint, the amount of stress experienced by the cartilage and bone depends on both the total force and the area over which it's distributed. Double the force, and you double the stress. But double the joint surface area, and you halve the stress. Neanderthals, generating greater muscular forces than modern humans, needed larger joint surfaces to keep stress levels within tolerable ranges. The knee provides an excellent example. The distal femur, where the thigh bone meets the knee joint, has two rounded prominences called condyles that articulate with the flat top of the tibia. In Neanderthals, these condyles are broader, with larger surface areas, than in modern humans of similar height. The patella, the kneecap, is also larger and more robust, with a thicker articular cartilage surface based on the depth of the groove in which it sits. The ankle joint shows similar patterns. The articulation between the talus, that ankle bone that bears your entire body weight, and the tibia and fibula bones of the lower leg, is more expansive in Neanderthals. The trochlea of the talus, that pulley-shaped surface that rolls within the ankle mortise, is broader and deeper, suggesting greater congruence and load-bearing capacity. The upper limb bones show this dramatically. The distal radius, that flared end of your forearm bone near your wrist, is significantly more robust in Neanderthals. The joint surface where it articulates with the wrist bones is broader, better able to handle compressive forces during activities like spear thrusting or tool use. The trabecular bone architecture within this region, examined through CT scanning, shows patterns consistent with habitual loading in multiple directions, suggesting hands that were used for diverse forceful activities. The elbow joint shows similar adaptations, with Neanderthals displaying enlarged olecranon processes, the bony projection at the back of your elbow where the triceps muscle attaches. A larger olecranon means better leverage for the triceps, one of the key muscles in generating pushing and thrusting power. The mechanical advantage can be calculated. It's the ratio of the distance from the joint center to the muscle attachment divided by the distance from the joint center to the point where force is applied. Even a modest increase in olecranon size translates to a significant increase in mechanical advantage, meaning more force output for the same amount of muscle contraction. The shoulder joint, that ball and socket articulation between the humerus and scapula, also shows distinctive features. The glenoid fossa, the shallow socket on the scapula that receives the humeral head, is relatively larger in Neanderthals. This provides more contact area, better load distribution, but also potentially greater stability during forceful movements. The humeral head itself, that ball at the top of the upper arm bone, is also larger relative to shaft diameter, another indicator of joints adapted for handling high loads. The humerus, the upper arm bone, deserves special attention because it reveals one of the most distinctive features of Neanderthal anatomy. Many Neanderthal humeri show remarkable asymmetry, with the right arm bone displaying far more robust development than the left. This isn't subtle. We're talking about differences of 50% or more in the development of the deltoid tuberosity, the bony prominence on the outside of the upper arm where the powerful deltoid muscle attaches. For years, scientists assumed this asymmetry resulted from spear throwing, with the dominant throwing arm developing more muscle and bone mass. But experimental studies involving volunteers performing various tasks while wearing electrodes to measure muscle activation told a different story. Spear thrusting, it turns out, actually generates more muscle activity on the left side of the body than the right for right-handed individuals. But hide scraping, the laborious process of cleaning and processing animal skins, generates intense, sustained muscle activity specifically on the right side. The implications are fascinating. This skeletal evidence suggests Neanderthals spent considerable time and effort processing hides, likely for clothing and shelter. In the frigid climates they inhabited, this wasn't luxury work. It was survival, and the bones, remember. The repeated forceful scraping motions, performed thousands upon thousands of times over a lifetime, literally reshaped the skeleton, building up bone in response to the tremendous forces generated by the muscles. This brings us to a crucial concept in understanding Neanderthal skeletal power: Wolff's Law. This principle, established in the 19th century but confirmed by modern research, states that bone grows and remodels itself in response to the forces placed upon it. Bone isn't static. It's constantly being broken down and rebuilt by specialized cells called osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Where mechanical stress is high, the building cells predominate, adding bone mass. Where stress is low, the demolition cells remove unnecessary bone. Neanderthal skeletons show the unmistakable signature of Wolff's Law taken to an extreme. Every rugose muscle attachment site, every thickened bone shaft, every enlarged joint surface represents the body's response to tremendous mechanical loads. These weren't people who occasionally exerted themselves. These were individuals who, from childhood onwards, subjected their skeletons to forces that would hospitalize modern humans. Recent research has even identified genetic factors that may have contributed to Neanderthal skeletal robusticity. The LRP5 gene, which plays a crucial role in bone mineral density regulation, shows distinct patterns in archaic human genomes compared to modern humans. Neanderthals carried variants of this gene associated with high bone mineral density conditions. When researchers tested these archaic variants in laboratory experiments, 4 out of 5 Neanderthal-specific mutations showed enhanced activation of the W1 signaling pathway, which promotes bone formation. This suggests that Neanderthal skeletal power had a genetic component. They weren't just strong because they worked hard. Their DNA was literally programmed to build denser, more robust bones than ours. This genetic predisposition, combined with a lifetime of intense physical activity, created skeletons that represent the upper limits of what the human body plan can achieve in terms of structural strength. The vertebral column, the spine, shows similar adaptations. Neanderthal vertebrae are thicker, with larger vertebral bodies to support the tremendous loads generated by their powerful musculature. The transverse processes, those wing-like projections sticking out from each vertebra where back muscles attach, are more robust, providing better leverage for the deep muscles that control spinal position and movement. A strong, stable spine is essential for transferring force from legs to upper body and vice versa. You can have the strongest arms and legs in the world, but if your core and spine can't efficiently transmit that force, power bleeds away. Even the skull reflects the overall pattern of skeletal robusticity. The Neanderthal skull is characterized by massive brow ridges, thick cranial bones, and a distinctive occipital bun that bulge at the back of the skull. While much of the cranial morphology relates to brain shape and size, which we'll discuss later, the sheer thickness of Neanderthal cranial bone speaks to the same pattern we see throughout the skeleton. These were not gracile beings. Every element of their skeleton, from skull to toe bones, demonstrates adaptation for handling high mechanical loads. Interestingly, this robusticity was present from birth. Studies of Neanderthal neonates, the youngest individuals we've found, show that even newborn Neanderthals had proportionally shorter, thicker bones than modern human infants. The babies from Mesmaïskaya cave in Russia and Le Moustier in France, dating to around 70,000 years ago, clearly demonstrate this. Their limb bones, their pelvic structures, all show the characteristic Neanderthal proportions despite their young age. This means the skeletal differences weren't purely the result of different activity patterns during life, though activity certainly enhanced them. The fundamental architecture was genetic, built into the developmental program from the moment of conception. This presents us with an interesting evolutionary question. If strong, dense skeletons are so advantageous, why did modern humans lose them? Why are our bones lighter, more gracile, seemingly less capable of handling the kinds of forces Neanderthals managed routinely? The answer lies in understanding evolutionary trade-offs. Strong bones aren't free. They require tremendous amounts of calcium and phosphorus to build and maintain. They're metabolically expensive, requiring energy to keep the osteoblasts building new bone tissue. And they're heavy. Every extra ounce of bone is weight you have to carry, calories you have to burn just moving your body through space. For Neanderthals living in resource-rich but climatically harsh Europe, the trade-off made sense. The extra strength was worth the metabolic cost because their hunting strategies and harsh environment demanded it. But for modern humans, who developed more sophisticated hunting technologies, who learned to exploit a wider range of food sources, who eventually transitioned to agriculture and more sedentary lifestyles, maintaining such robust skeletons became unnecessary. Natural selection favoured lighter builds that required less energy to maintain. The shift to agriculture, which occurred roughly 12,000 years ago, marks exactly the period when human skeletal gracilization accelerated dramatically. When you no longer need to chase down prey, when your food comes from fields rather than forests, when your daily energy expenditure drops significantly, the body responds. Without the mechanical loading that stimulated bone formation, without the selective pressure maintaining genetic variance for high bone density, our skeletons became lighter. Today, we suffer from this evolutionary hangover. Osteoporosis, the condition where bone density drops below healthy thresholds, affects millions of people. We've created a world where our bodies rarely experience the mechanical loads they evolved to handle. We sit for hours, walk on flat surfaces, lift nothing heavier than a laptop. Our skeletons, which expect to be loaded and stressed, instead waste away from disuse. Studies of modern populations provide a stark illustration. When researchers compared the hip bone density of ancient hunter-gatherers to ancient farmers to modern sedentary people, they found a clear progression. The hunter-gatherers had hip density comparable to apes, reflecting their active lifestyles. The early farmers showed significant reduction. Modern humans show even greater bone loss. We've lost approximately 40% of our bone mass in just 12,000 years, most of it in the last millennium. If you could somehow transport a Neanderthal forward in time and put them through modern medical imaging, the radiologist would likely flag their bones as abnormally dense, possibly pathological. The density values that were normal for them would appear as a medical condition to us. That's how far we've drifted from the ancestral human condition. But Neanderthal skeletal power wasn't just about dense bones. It was about how those bones worked as a system, how they provided anchor points and leverage for the truly impressive feature of Neanderthal anatomy, their muscles. The skeleton is, after all, just the framework. To understand why Neanderthals were so powerful, we need to examine the engine that drove that framework, the biological machinery that converted chemical energy into physical force. We need to talk about muscle. Section 2, the muscular engine. Strength through anatomy. Muscle tissue is where strength truly resides. You can have the densest, most robust skeleton imaginable, but without powerful muscles to move those bones, you're just carrying around heavy calcium structures. Neanderthal muscles, as far as we can reconstruct them from the evidence left on their bones, represented some of the most impressive biological machinery evolution has ever produced in the human lineage. We can't, of course, examine actual Neanderthal muscle tissue. Muscle is soft tissue, and soft tissue decays rapidly after death, leaving nothing for paleontologists to study thousands of years later. But muscles leave their signatures on bones. Every time a muscle contracts, it pulls on the bone to which it's attached via tendons. Over time, this repeated pulling creates characteristic markings, rugosities, tuberosities, crests, ridges, and fossae. These markings, collectively called enthesial features, provide a map of muscle attachments and, crucially, give us information about the size and force of the muscles that created them. The relationship between muscle attachment features and muscle force isn't perfectly linear. Larger attachment sites don't automatically mean proportionally larger muscles, but studies of modern human populations with known activity patterns have established that Yes, more developed enthesial features do correlate with greater muscle mass and repeated, forceful muscle use. When you see massively developed muscle attachment sites on Neanderthal bones, you're looking at evidence of muscles that generated tremendous forces, repeatedly, throughout life. Let's start with the upper body, because that's where some of the most dramatic evidence appears. The Neanderthal shoulder was a marvel of power engineering. The scapula, that triangular blade of bone on your back, shows consistently more developed attachments for the deltoid, the thick cap of muscle that covers the shoulder joint. The spine of the scapula, that ridge of bone you can feel on your shoulder blade, was more pronounced in Neanderthals, providing more surface area for muscle attachment. The deltoid muscle itself is crucial for nearly all shoulder movements, lifting the arm away from the body, rotating it, stabilizing the joint during force production. A well-developed deltoid is essential for any activity involving the arms, from throwing to thrusting to lifting. The pronounced deltoid attachments on Neanderthal scapulae and humerae suggest muscles significantly larger than those of modern humans, but the deltoid is just one part of the shoulder complex. The rotator cuff muscles, those deep stabilizers that keep your arm bone properly seated in the shallow socket of the shoulder joint, also show evidence of greater development. The infraspinatus and supraspinatus fossae on the scapula, where two of these muscles attach, are deeper and more clearly defined in Neanderthals. This matters because powerful, rapid movements of the arm require exceptional stability at the shoulder joint. Without strong rotator cuff muscles, the tremendous forces generated by the deltoid and other large muscles would simply dislocate the shoulder. The latissimus dorsi, that broad sheet of muscle connecting your arm to your spine and pelvis, was clearly massive in Neanderthals. The attachment site on the humerus shows development that suggests a muscle capable of generating tremendous pulling force. This is the muscle you use when performing pull-ups, when hauling yourself up a cliff face, when dragging a heavy carcass. A Neanderthal's ability to manipulate heavy objects, to move loads that would require multiple modern humans, was significantly enhanced by their enlarged latissimus dorsi. Moving down the arm, the biceps and triceps attachments tell their own story. The bicipital tuberosity on the radius, where the biceps tendon inserts, is more robust in Neanderthals, but it's the triceps attachment that really stands out. Remember that enlarged olecranon process we discussed in the skeletal section? That's where the triceps attaches, and a larger olecranon means better leverage for the triceps muscle. The triceps is the primary elbow extender, the muscle that straightens your arm. When you push something, when you thrust a spear, when you perform any forceful extension of the arm, you're using your triceps. The triceps attachment sites on Neanderthal ulnae suggest muscles capable of generating extension forces that would put modern powerlifters to shame. The forearm muscles present particularly interesting evidence. The forearm contains numerous muscles controlling fine movements of the wrist and fingers, but also powerful muscles involved in gripping and rotating the forearm. The attachment sites for the forearm flexors and extensors, the muscles on the palm side and back of your forearm, are consistently more developed in Neanderthals. The interosseous crest, that ridge between the radius and ulna where deep forearm muscles attach, is more pronounced. But there's something else fascinating about Neanderthal forearms. The attachment point for the biceps on the radius is positioned in such a way that when the biceps contracts, it doesn't just flex the elbow, it also supinates the forearm, rotating it so the palm faces upward. In Neanderthals, this attachment appears to have been optimized for generating maximum rotational force. This would have been incredibly useful for activities requiring powerful twisting motions of the forearm, such as working tools, processing materials, or manipulating weapons. The hand itself deserves detailed examination. Neanderthals had proportionally shorter thumbs and index fingers than modern humans, but this doesn't seem to have impaired their dexterity. Studies of enthesial features on Neanderthal hand bones suggest they were fully capable of precision grips, the thumb-to-fingertip grasp we use for fine manipulation, but they also show exceptionally well-developed attachment sites for the muscles involved in power grips, the full hand squeeze you use when holding a hammer or gripping a thick branch. Recent research using quantitative three-dimensional analysis of hand enthesial features compared Neanderthals to medieval humans with documented occupations. Some of these historical individuals were heavy labourers whose hands were subjected to repeated powerful gripping, while others were craftspeople whose work required more precision and less force. The Neanderthal pattern matches that of the heavy labourers, suggesting habitual powerful gripping was a routine part of their lives. Interestingly, this doesn't mean their hands lacked fine motor control. The attachment sites for the intrinsic hand muscles, those small muscles within the hand itself that control precise finger movements, show that Neanderthals maintained the capability for delicate manipulation alongside their grip, strength. This combination, powerful gripping capability with maintained dexterity, represents an optimal configuration for beings who needed to make sophisticated stone tools while also being capable of wrestling with large prey animals. Now let's move to the core and back, the torso musculature that forms the foundation for all limb movements. The core muscles include the abdominals, the obliques, the erector spinae group running along your spine, the multifidus muscles deep within your back, and numerous other muscles that stabilize and move the trunk. The attachments for these muscles on Neanderthal bones suggest exceptional core strength. The spinous processes on Neanderthal vertebrae, those projections sticking straight back from each vertebra, are more robust, providing better attachment for the deep spinal muscles. The transverse processes, as mentioned earlier, show similar enhancement. The pelvis bears clear marks of powerful hip flexors, extensors, abductors, and adductors. Core strength is often underappreciated when people think about physical power, but the core is where power is generated and transmitted. A punch, a thrown object, a spear thrust, none of these begin in the arms. They begin in the legs and core, with rotational force from the hips and trunk being transmitted through the torso and out through the limbs. Without a powerful core, all the arm strength in the world amounts to relatively little. Neanderthals had cores built for generating explosive rotational power. The oblique muscles, which wrap around your sides and control twisting movements, attach to ribs and pelvis at angles that, when combined with the Neanderthal body proportions, suggest exceptional twisting capability. When a Neanderthal thrust a spear, the motion didn't just involve the arm, it involved a coordinated chain of muscle activation starting from the feet, moving through the legs, exploding through the core, and transmitting through the shoulder and arm. This kinetic chain, the sequential activation of muscles to generate maximum force, was optimized in the Neanderthal body plan. The lower body muscles present equally impressive evidence. The gluteus maximus, the largest muscle in the human body, was clearly massive in Neanderthals. This muscle extends the hip, the movement you make when standing from a seated position, or driving your leg backward when running or climbing. The attachment site on the femur shows development suggesting a muscle even larger relative to body size than in modern humans. The quadriceps, that group of 4 muscles on the front of your thigh, attaches to the tibia via the patellar tendon. The tibial tuberosity, the bony bump below your kneecap where this tendon inserts, is more developed in Neanderthals. The quadriceps is primarily responsible for extending the knee, the motion involved in standing, jumping, running, and kicking. Powerfully developed quadriceps would have been essential for the explosive movements Neanderthal hunting required. The hamstrings, on the back of the thigh, flex the knee and extend the hip. Their attachment sites on the pelvis and the tibia both show enhanced development in Neanderthals. The interplay between hamstrings and quadriceps is crucial for rapid acceleration and deceleration, for jumping, for changing direction quickly. Neanderthals needed powerful hamstrings to function as ambush predators. The calf muscles, particularly the gastrocnemius and soleus, which form the bulk of your calf, attach via the Achilles tendon to that lengthened heel bone we discussed earlier. These muscles plantar flex the ankle, pointing your foot downward, the motion crucial for push-off when running or jumping. The combination of the longer heel bone increasing the moment arm and the well-developed muscle attachment site suggests calf muscles capable of generating tremendous force for acceleration. But muscle size is only part of the equation. The type of muscle fibers matters just as much as the quantity. Human muscle comes in 2 basic varieties: type 1, slow twitch fibers, and type 2, fast twitch fibers. Slow twitch fibers are built for endurance, resisting fatigue during prolonged moderate activity. Fast twitch fibers generate more force and contract more quickly, but fatigue faster. They're the fibers you use for explosive, powerful movements. We can't directly examine Neanderthal muscle tissue to determine their fiber type ratios, but researchers can make educated inferences based on their anatomy and lifestyle. The skeletal evidence, their body proportions optimized for power movements, their hunting strategies requiring short bursts of maximum effort, their entire way of life centered on high intensity rather than sustained endurance activities, all suggest they likely had a higher proportion of fast-twitch muscle fibers than modern humans. Genetic analysis has provided supporting evidence for this interpretation. The Neanderthal genome contains a high proportion of variants in genes that, in modern humans, are associated with high-level athletic performance in power sports. When these genetic variants are expressed, they're linked to characteristics like increased muscle mass, faster contraction speeds, and enhanced performance in sprinting and strength activities. While we can't definitively prove Neanderthal muscle fiber composition, the genetic evidence aligns with what the skeletal anatomy suggests: bodies built for power and speed rather than endurance. This has interesting implications for their muscle composition. A muscle composed primarily of fast-twitch fibers is capable of generating more force than one of equal size composed primarily of slow-twitch fibers. But that fast-twitch muscle also requires more energy to maintain and will fatigue more quickly. This ties directly into the metabolic demands we'll discuss in the next section. But for now, understand that Neanderthal muscles weren't just bigger. They were, in all likelihood, intrinsically stronger per unit volume than modern human muscles. Let's talk about specific comparisons. It's difficult to directly measure the strength of extinct humans, but researchers have attempted estimates based on skeletal features. By examining leverage advantages, muscle attachment site development, and cross-sectional bone geometry, some analyses have suggested Neanderthals possessed significantly greater strength than modern humans. One estimate, based on these skeletal proxies, proposed they could have been approximately 4 times stronger than average modern humans, though this figure comes with substantial caveats. Such estimates should be interpreted carefully. We're reconstructing the capabilities of extinct humans based on indirect evidence, bone structure, and comparative anatomy, which involves numerous assumptions about muscle size, fiber type, and mechanical efficiency. The actual strength difference is difficult to quantify precisely. What we can say with more confidence is that the skeletal evidence, the robust attachment sites, the bone thickness, the joint surface areas, all point to muscular capabilities substantially beyond what we see in modern human populations. Whether the difference was 2-fold, 3-fold, or 4-fold, we're discussing beings whose physical power would have dramatically exceeded our own. Another way to think about this: studies have estimated that over the past million years, humans have lost approximately 40% of our skeletal mass and muscle strength, with most of that loss occurring in the past 12,000 years. If modern humans retained 100% of ancestral strength, we'd be much closer to Neanderthal capabilities, but we don't. We've lost nearly half of what our ancestors had, and Neanderthals, who branched off from our lineage hundreds of thousands of years ago, retained and even enhanced the robust characteristics we've abandoned. Modern Olympic weightlifters, powerlifters, and strongmen represent the upper limits of what modern human musculature can achieve with dedicated training, optimal nutrition, and sometimes pharmaceutical enhancement. But even these extreme examples don't possess the skeletal robusticity of Neanderthals. Their bones, while certainly strong by modern standards, still fall within the range of modern human bone structure. A Neanderthal skeleton would stand out even among elite modern strength athletes. The famous 19th and early 20th century strongmen, individuals like Louis Juni, who reportedly lifted 175 kilograms with one hand, or Thomas Topham, who stood only 176 centimeters tall and weighed less than 90 kilograms, but performed extraordinary feats of strength. These men came from harder working backgrounds where physical labor from a young age built bodies closer to our ancestral condition. But even they, remarkable as they were, likely didn't approach Neanderthal capabilities. Here's another consideration: Neanderthal women. The sexual dimorphism in Neanderthals, the size difference between males and females, was present but perhaps less pronounced than in modern humans. Neanderthal females weren't daintily built. They too carried powerful musculature, robust skeletons, the same adaptations the males possessed, just scaled slightly smaller. A Neanderthal female would likely have been stronger than many modern human males. This raises questions about division of labor in Neanderthal societies. In modern human hunter-gatherer groups, sexual division of labor is common, with men typically doing more hunting and women more gathering, though this varies by culture. But Neanderthal females, with their powerful builds and high injury rates suggesting participation in dangerous activities, may have had a different pattern. When everyone in the group is physically capable of bringing down large game, the modern pattern of specialized roles may not have applied. The masticatory muscles, those involved in chewing, also deserve mention. The human jaw is moved primarily by three pairs of muscles: the masseter, the temporalis, and the pterygoids. These muscles attach to the mandible and contract to close the jaw, generating bite force. In modern humans, these muscles are relatively gracile. We have small faces, reduced chewing muscles, and relatively low bite force compared to our ancestors and to Neanderthals. Neanderthal crania show more developed attachment sites for the temporalis muscle, which attaches along the side of the skull. The temporal lines, the ridges marking the upper border of temporalis attachment, are more pronounced in Neanderthals. The zygomatic arches, the cheekbones, are more robust, providing attachment for the masseter muscle. The mandible itself is heavier, with more prominent attachment sites for all the jaw-closing muscles. For years, researchers debated whether this meant Neanderthals could generate massive bite forces, particularly at the front teeth. The anterior dental loading hypothesis suggested that Neanderthals habitually used their front teeth as tools, gripping materials and pulling on them, generating high forces on the incisors and canines. The robust facial structure was interpreted as an adaptation to withstand these forces. Recent biomechanical analyses using three-dimensional computer models have revised this understanding. When researchers created detailed models of Neanderthal skulls and calculated the forces generated during biting, they found something surprising. Neanderthals weren't generating higher bite forces than modern humans. In fact, modern humans, with our shorter faces and more mechanically efficient jaw muscle positioning, can generate equal or even slightly higher bite forces despite having smaller masticatory muscles. What the analyses revealed is that Neanderthal faces were optimized differently. Rather than generating maximum bite force, their robust facial architecture excelled at resisting and withstanding forces, at handling repeated loading without structural failure. This distinction matters. If you're using your teeth not just for eating but as a third hand, gripping and holding materials while your hands do other things, you need a face that won't fracture under sustained or repeated strain, even if you're not necessarily generating higher peak forces. The wear patterns on Neanderthal teeth support this interpretation. Many Neanderthal specimens show heavy anterior tooth wear, grinding down of the front teeth from repeated use. But interestingly, when researchers compared the ratio of anterior to posterior tooth wear in Neanderthals versus modern humans from the same time period, Neanderthals didn't show significantly more differential wear. They wore down their front teeth more than their back teeth, but so did all late Pleistocene humans. The pattern isn't unique to Neanderthals. What is unique is the evenness of wear across the anterior teeth in Neanderthals, with the incisors and canines showing similar wear levels, while in modern humans the incisors tend to wear more than the canines. This suggests a slightly different pattern of use, perhaps related to how materials were gripped or manipulated. The key point is that Neanderthal masticatory muscles, while not necessarily generating higher peak forces than modern human muscles, were part of a robust system capable of handling high, repeated loading. Those muscles worked in concert with thick facial bones, large teeth, and a facial architecture optimized for durability. When you've got muscles powerful enough to generate forces that could damage your face, having a face built to handle those forces becomes essential. All this muscle required tremendous energy to build and maintain. Muscle tissue is metabolically expensive. It requires constant energy input just to exist, even at rest. Active muscle, contracting muscle requires far more. A heavily muscled individual has a higher basal metabolic rate than a lightly muscled one of the same height and weight. Those Neanderthal muscles, bigger than ours and composed of more metabolically demanding fast-twitch fibers, required enormous amounts of food to sustain. Estimates of Neanderthal daily caloric requirements range from 3,260 to 4,480 kilocalories per day, depending on the specific model used and assumptions about activity level. For comparison, a modern sedentary adult male requires around 2,000 to 2,500 kilocalories per day. Even modern athletes typically don't exceed 4,000 kilocalories, except during periods of extreme training. Neanderthals needed to consume approximately twice the calories of a modern human just to maintain their bodies. This wasn't just about muscle. Their larger overall body mass, their higher basal metabolic rate driven by adaptations to cold, their more active lifestyle all contributed. But the muscle was a significant part of that equation. Every pound of muscle you carry requires calories to maintain, and Neanderthals carried a lot of muscle. This created a feedback loop. To maintain their muscles, Neanderthals needed to eat large amounts of high-quality food, primarily meat. To obtain that meat, they needed to hunt, which required their powerful muscles. If hunting became unsuccessful for any extended period, they'd enter a caloric deficit, and their bodies would begin breaking down muscle tissue for energy. Loss of muscle mass would make future hunts even more difficult. This precarious energy balance may have contributed to Neanderthal vulnerability to environmental changes and competition with modern humans. But when food was available, when the hunting was good, those muscles made Neanderthals extraordinarily capable. Their power-to-weight ratio, while probably not as favourable as modern humans due to their heavier skeletons, still allowed for explosive movements, rapid accelerations, tremendous gripping strength. They could handle weapons that would be unwieldy for us, manipulate carcasses that would require multiple modern humans, traverse terrain that would exhaust us. The integration of skeletal and muscular systems in Neanderthals created something remarkable. Strong bones provided a framework that could handle the forces generated by powerful muscles. Those muscles, anchored to robust attachment sites, could generate forces that would overload a modern human skeleton. The result was a being optimized for a specific ecological niche: ambush predation of large game in challenging terrain and climate. But bones and muscles are just the framework and engine. To understand the complete picture of Neanderthal physical power, we need to examine the fuel that ran that engine, the metabolic processes that kept those massive muscles functioning, the physiological adaptations that allowed them to survive and thrive in some of the harshest environments humans have ever faced. We need to talk about the fire that burned within. Section 3. The Metabolic Furnace. Energy and Adaptation. Understanding. Neanderthal power requires understanding their metabolism, that complex web of chemical reactions that convert food into energy, that regulate body temperature, that keep the biological machinery running. Neanderthal metabolism wasn't just scaled-up modern human metabolism. It was fundamentally different, adapted for cold, for high-energy demands, for a lifestyle that would exhaust us. Let's start with the basics. Basal metabolic rate, or BMR, is the amount of energy your body needs just to exist, to keep your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your brain thinking, your cells functioning. It's the caloric cost of being alive, measured at rest in a neutral temperature. BMR is influenced by many factors: body size, body composition, age, sex, and importantly for our discussion, climate adaptation. There's a well-established principle in biology called Bergmann's rule, which states that within a species, populations in colder climates tend to have larger body sizes than populations in warmer climates. Larger bodies have a lower surface area to volume ratio, meaning less skin area relative to body mass, which reduces heat loss. Throughout the animal kingdom you see this pattern. Polar bears are larger than tropical bears, Arctic foxes are stockier than desert foxes. Neanderthals fit this pattern perfectly. They evolved in glacial Europe, spending hundreds of thousands of years adapted to some of the coldest climate conditions humans have ever experienced. Their stocky, heavily built bodies weren't just about strength, they were also about thermal efficiency. A Neanderthal male averaged around 165 centimeters tall and 75 kilograms, with a powerfully built compact body. That body plan maximized volume while minimizing surface area, reducing heat loss to the frigid environment. There's a related principle called Allen's rule, which states that animals in cold climates tend to have shorter appendages, reducing surface area even further. Neanderthals followed this too, with their shortened limbs, particularly the forearms and lower legs. Every bit of exposed surface is a potential avenue for heat loss. Shorter limbs help retain warmth, but body shape is just passive thermal efficiency. The real key to understanding Neanderthal adaptation to cold lies in their active thermogenesis, their ability to generate heat metabolically. This is where the high BMR comes in. Modern humans who live in cold climates show elevated BMRs compared to those in temperate or tropical regions. Your body turns up its metabolic furnace to generate more heat. This requires more calories but keeps you alive in conditions that would otherwise kill you. Neanderthals, living through ice ages, facing winters where temperatures dropped far below freezing needed exceptional thermogenic capacity. Multiple lines of evidence suggest Neanderthals had significantly elevated BMRs compared to modern humans. First, their high muscle mass. Muscle tissue generates heat even at rest. A heavily muscled individual produces more metabolic heat than a lightly muscled one. Second, their body composition. Modern estimates suggest Neanderthals had relatively low body fat percentages, perhaps similar to modern athletes. Without thick subcutaneous fat layers to provide passive insulation, they relied more heavily on active heat production. Third, researchers have explored whether Neanderthals might have possessed enhanced brown adipose tissue. Brown adipose tissue, or BAT, is a specialized form of fat that doesn't primarily store energy like regular white fat. Instead, BAT burns energy to produce heat through a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. It contains numerous mitochondria, the cellular powerhouses, which give it a brown color. In modern humans, BAT is most prominent in newborns, helping them maintain body temperature when they can't yet shiver effectively. Recent research has shown that adults, particularly those living in cold climates, retain significant BAT deposits, usually around the neck and upper torso near major blood vessels. Studies of people living in cold regions like Siberia show more active BAT than those in warmer climates. When exposed to cold, their BAT increases metabolic activity, burning calories to generate warmth. The question of whether Neanderthals had enhanced BAT remains open. Researchers have examined genetic signatures in the Neanderthal genome for clues. Several genes involved in BAT metabolism, storage and function show patterns in archaic human genomes that differ from modern human patterns, though the functional implications of these differences are still being investigated. Based on their cold-adapted lifestyle and high metabolic demands, it's plausible that Neanderthals could have had more active BAT than modern humans from temperate climates, though direct evidence for this remains elusive. If present, enhanced BT combined with their muscle mass and body composition could have created a powerful thermogenic system for maintaining core body temperature in extreme cold. But generating heat requires fuel, and lots of it. This brings us to diet. Neanderthal diet has been extensively studied through multiple lines of evidence: isotope analysis of their bones, which reveals the sources of protein in their diet, examination of food residues in dental calculus, analysis of animal bones found at Neanderthal sites showing butchery marks, and study of their tools, which include many implements for processing meat and hides. The consensus is clear: Neanderthals were hypercarnivores, obtaining the vast majority of their calories from meat. Isotope analysis, comparing Neanderthals to contemporary carnivores like wolves and hyenas, shows Neanderthal nitrogen isotope ratios are similar to, or higher than, these top predators. They were eating at the top of the food chain, consuming primarily large game animals. The science of isotope analysis provides remarkable insights into ancient diets. When an animal eats, the chemical composition of its food becomes incorporated into its tissues, including bone. Different foods have different ratios of stable isotopes, particularly carbon-13 to carbon-12 and nitrogen-15 to nitrogen-14. By measuring these ratios in fossil bone, scientists can determine what an individual ate, even tens of thousands of years after death. Nitrogen isotopes are particularly informative for understanding protein sources and trophic level, how high up the food chain an organism fed. Each step up the food chain, from plants to herbivores to carnivores, results in an enrichment of nitrogen, 15 relative to nitrogen-14 by about 3 to 5 parts per thousand. When researchers measure Neanderthal bone nitrogen ratios and compare them to contemporary animals whose diets are known from fossil assemblages, Neanderthals consistently plot at the same level as or above apex carnivores. Studies from multiple sites and time periods show this pattern. Neanderthals from Belgium, dating to around 40,000 years ago, show nitrogen values consistent with a diet of almost exclusively meat. Neanderthals from France show similar patterns. Even in warmer, more temperate regions where plant foods would have been more abundant, Neanderthal isotope signatures indicate heavy reliance on animal protein. Carbon isotopes provide information about the types of ecosystems the prey animals lived in, which indirectly tells us about what Neanderthals were hunting. The values suggest they were primarily hunting large herbivores from open and mixed environments: horses, bison, reindeer. Marine resources, which would show distinctive carbon values, are largely absent from most Neanderthal diets, though there are a few coastal sites showing evidence of shellfish and seal consumption. But isotope analysis only tells part of the story. Direct evidence of food consumption comes from other sources. Dental calculus, that hardened plaque on teeth, sometimes preserves microscopic particles of food. Analysis of Neanderthal dental calculus from sites in Spain and Belgium has revealed plant microfossils showing they did consume plant materials. Starch granules, phytoliths from grasses and other plants, even evidence of cooked plant foods appear in some specimens. Chemical residues extracted from dental calculus can be analysed to identify specific compounds. Some Neanderthal samples show evidence of bitter-tasting plants that have little nutritional value but potential medicinal properties. This suggests not just opportunistic plant consumption but potentially sophisticated knowledge of plant properties and uses. Animal bone assemblages at Neanderthal sites provide the most direct evidence of what they hunted. Sites across Europe show butchered remains of horses, bison, reindeer, red deer, ibex, chamois, aurochs, and occasionally more impressive prey. At some German sites, evidence of hunted straight-tusked elephants appears, animals so massive that a single individual could provide meat for dozens of people for weeks. The butchery patterns are revealing. Neanderthals were thorough processors of carcasses. Cut marks show they removed meat systematically, disarticulated joints, accessed marrow by breaking long bones, removed tongues and other organ meats. Nothing went to waste. The bones were processed for marrow, one of the most calorie-dense parts of an animal. Skulls were sometimes opened to access brains, another rich food source. This makes sense from a metabolic perspective. Meat, particularly fatty meat, is energy-dense. It provides concentrated calories in a package that's more efficiently digested than plant matter. For beings with extremely high caloric requirements, meat was the logical choice. A kilogram of fatty meat contains roughly 2,500 to 3,000 kilocalories. A kilogram of typical plant foods might contain 500 to 7,500 kilocalories, and much of that is bound up in cellulose and other difficult-to-digest fibers. Plant foods, while certainly part of the Neanderthal diet, evidence clearly shows they consumed plants, mushrooms, nuts, and other materials couldn't provide the caloric density needed to fuel their metabolism efficiently. To meet a requirement of 3,500 to 4,000 kilocalories per day, primarily through plant foods, would require eating several kilograms of plant material daily. That's a lot of chewing, a lot of digestive work, a lot of time spent processing food instead of hunting or other activities. The estimated daily energy expenditure of 3,360 to 4,480 kilocalories requires substantial food intake. To put that in context, that's roughly equivalent to eating 1.5 to 2 kilograms of fatty meat per day, every day. Or looked at another way, a large deer might provide 50 to 80 kilograms of usable meat. For a Neanderthal requiring 4,000 kilocalories daily, that deer would last about 2 to 3 weeks if it were the sole food source. Factor in that Neanderthals lived in groups, with multiple individuals sharing each kill, and you begin to understand why they had to hunt frequently and successfully. The digestive system had to be capable of processing these quantities of meat efficiently. While the Neanderthal gut was likely similar to the modern human gut in basic structure, researchers have considered whether there might have been some functional differences. Some analyses have proposed that carnivorous adaptations could theoretically include proportional differences in digestive tract segments, though direct evidence for this in Neanderthals is lacking. What we can say with more confidence is that their digestive systems were adapted to extract maximum nutrition from meat-heavy diets, supporting their enormous caloric requirements. The respiratory system played a crucial role in meeting these metabolic demands. Breathing isn't just about getting oxygen into your lungs, it's about delivering that oxygen to your tissues, particularly your muscles, where it's used in the chemical reactions that break down glucose and fat to produce energy. Higher metabolic rates require more oxygen, which means you need to breathe more, move more air volume, extract oxygen more efficiently. We've already discussed the Neanderthal respiratory system briefly in the skeletal section, but let's dig deeper into the functional implications. The larger nasal aperture, that wide nose so characteristic of Neanderthal skulls, wasn't just about appearance. The internal nasal cavity, the space behind that external opening, was also enlarged. Recent computational fluid dynamics studies, using digital reconstructions of Neanderthal nasal passages, have shown that Neanderthals could move significantly more air through their noses than modern humans. These computational studies represent sophisticated engineering analyses applied to ancient anatomy. Researchers create three-dimensional models of Neanderthal skulls from CT scans, digitally reconstruct the soft tissue structures of the nasal cavity based on bony landmarks, then use computer simulations to model airflow through these passages. The simulations can calculate air velocity, turbulence, heat transfer, and moisture addition under various breathing conditions. The results consistently show that Neanderthal nasal passages could handle higher airflow rates, with less resistance than modern human noses. This isn't surprising given the larger cross-sectional area, but the degree of difference is significant. Under maximal breathing conditions, simulating intense exertion, Neanderthal nasal passages could move perhaps 20 to 30% more air volume than modern human noses. But it's not just volume. The nasal cavity doesn't simply conduct air, it conditions it, warming cold air and adding moisture before it reaches the delicate tissues of the lungs. Cold, dry air can damage lung tissue, causing inflammation and reducing efficiency. The nasal cavity prevents this through a complex system of turbinate bones, those scroll-like structures inside your nose that increase the surface area of the nasal lining. In humans, there are typically 3 turbinates on each side of the nose: inferior, middle, and superior. These thin bones project from the lateral wall of the nasal cavity, covered by a mucous membrane rich in blood vessels. As air flows past the turbinates, it picks up heat from the warm blood in the vessels and moisture from the mucous membrane. By the time inspired air reaches the back of the throat, it's been warmed to near body temperature and saturated with water vapour. Neanderthals had well-developed turbinate systems. While the turbinate bones themselves don't preserve well in fossils, the spaces they occupied can be reconstructed from the morphology of the nasal cavity walls. Neanderthal nasal cavities show evidence of large turbinates, providing extensive surface area for air conditioning. The combination of large nasal volume and extensive turbinate surface area meant they could rapidly process large volumes of cold air, warming it to body temperature and humidifying it before it reached the lungs. This is essential for survival in frigid environments. Breathing extremely cold air directly into your lungs can cause ice crystal formation, tissue damage, even frostbite of internal respiratory surfaces. The Neanderthal nose was exceptionally well adapted for preventing this. Consider the physics involved. Air has low thermal conductivity, meaning it doesn't transfer heat very efficiently. To warm a large volume of cold air to body temperature in the short time it takes to inhale requires extensive contact with warm surfaces. The turbinates provide this contact area. Blood flowing through the turbinate mucosa delivers heat, which transfers to the passing air. The more surface area, the more efficient the heat transfer. Moisture addition works similarly. The mucous membrane covering the turbinates constantly secretes fluids. These fluids evaporate into the passing airstream, humidifying the air. In extremely cold environments, the air is also typically very dry, having low absolute humidity. Dry air in the lungs promotes fluid loss from lung tissues and can lead to dehydration and respiratory problems. Adding moisture in the nasal cavity prevents these issues. Recent studies using computational fluid dynamics have also examined the nasal passage's role in heat conservation. When you exhale, warm, humidified air from your lungs passes back through the nasal cavity. Some of that heat and moisture is deposited back onto the turbinates, reducing heat loss. This counter-current heat exchange system, where incoming cold air is warmed partially by heat recovered from outgoing warm air, is an elegant adaptation for conserving thermal energy. Neanderthal nasal morphology appears optimized for this heat exchange. The long nasal passages, the extensive turbinate systems, the specific angles and volumes of the different regions all contribute to efficient respiratory heat and moisture conservation. Mathematical modelling suggests Neanderthals could breathe very cold air with minimal net heat loss, a crucial adaptation for surviving Ice Age winters. But there's another dimension to Neanderthal respiratory capabilities that relates directly to their power and athleticism. The nasal cavity and sinuses also function in vocal resonance and potentially in regulating intracranial pressure during intense physical exertion. The frontal sinuses, those air spaces in the forehead above the eyes, are particularly large in Neanderthals. The maxillary sinuses in the cheekbones are also substantial. The function of the sinuses has long puzzled anatomists. They reduce skull weight, that's clear. They provide resonance for vocalization. but some researchers have proposed they might also play a role in cushioning the brain during impacts, in regulating temperature of inhaled air, or in buffering pressure changes. During intense physical activity, when you're breathing hard and generating significant intrathoracic pressure with each breath, the sinuses might help equilibrate pressures and protect delicate structures. Whether Neanderthal sinuses served these functions more effectively than ours is speculative, but their size and distribution are distinctive. Combined with the nasal passages, they represent a respiratory system adapted for moving large volumes of air efficiently while conditioning that air for the demands of Arctic or near-Arctic environments. The bell-shaped ribcage we discussed earlier housed lungs that were almost certainly larger than ours. More lung capacity means more gas exchange surface area, more oxygen diffusing into the bloodstream per breath. It also provides reserve capacity for intense exertion. When you sprint, when you fight, when you perform any maximal effort activity, your oxygen demand skyrockets. Having larger lungs means you can meet that demand more effectively, sustaining high-intensity activity longer. The cardiovascular system had to match the respiratory system's capabilities. Larger lungs providing more oxygen are useless without a heart and circulatory system capable of moving that oxygen-rich blood throughout the body. While we can't directly examine Neanderthal hearts, we can make reasonable inferences based on their overall physiology and the principles of cardiovascular adaptation. The heart is a muscle, and like all muscles, it responds to demand through a process called cardiac remodeling. An individual with high metabolic demands, substantial muscle mass, and frequent intense physical activity would be expected to develop a larger, stronger heart than someone sedentary. Based on these principles, and the evidence of Neanderthal lifestyle demands, their hearts were almost certainly adapted to pump blood more forcefully to meet the oxygen demands of their massive muscles and elevated metabolism, though the precise magnitude of these adaptations cannot be determined from fossil evidence alone. The blood vessels themselves may have shown adaptations. In cold-adapted populations of modern humans, we see evidence of specialized vascular responses to cold. Blood vessels in the extremities can constrict to reduce heat loss from hands and feet, preserving warmth in the core, but they can also undergo cold-induced vasodilation, periodically opening to allow warm blood to flow to the extremities, preventing frostbite. This creates a cycling pattern: constrict to conserve heat, dilate to prevent tissue damage, constrict again. Neanderthals likely had similar or even enhanced vascular control. Their hands and feet, with their high bone density and robust structure, needed adequate blood flow to maintain function during cold exposure. The fingertips and toes are particularly vulnerable to frostbite because they're the furthest points from the heart, the smallest volumes with the highest surface area to volume ratios. Maintaining circulation to these areas while minimizing heat loss requires sophisticated vascular control. One fascinating aspect of cold adaptation that's often overlooked is the stress on the body's thermoregulatory system during high-intensity activity. When you're working hard, your muscles generate tremendous amounts of heat. In cold weather, this might seem ideal, all that metabolic heat keeping you warm. But there's a catch. If you're working intensely enough, you can actually overheat even in freezing conditions. Modern Arctic hunters know this well. During a hunt, during any prolonged intense activity, you can become dangerously overheated. Then, when you stop when the activity ends, all that sweat you've generated now makes you vulnerable to hypothermia as the moisture evaporates and conducts heat away from your body. Neanderthals faced this challenge routinely. Their hunting strategy, which we'll discuss in detail in the next section, involves short bursts of maximum intensity activity. This would generate enormous amounts of heat. Their high muscle mass and fast-twitch fiber composition meant they produced heat very efficiently during activity. But their compact body plan, optimized for minimizing heat loss at rest, became a liability during intense exertion. How did they manage this thermoregulatory challenge? Partly through behavioral adaptations. Archaeological evidence suggests Neanderthals may have used different clothing strategies than later modern humans, though the organic materials rarely preserve. Some researchers have proposed that rather than fully tailored garments, Neanderthals might have used capes or wraps, which would allow better heat dissipation during intense activity, while still providing protection when at rest. This interpretation remains debated, as clothing rarely survives in the archaeological record. Physiological mechanisms must have played a role as well, Humans are exceptional sweaters among mammals, possessing more sweat glands per unit area than almost any other species. This evaporative cooling system is remarkably efficient. Whether Neanderthals matched or exceeded modern human sweating capacity is unknown, but their need to regulate heat during intense exertion in cold climates suggests effective thermoregulatory mechanisms were essential. The respiratory system may have served dual purposes in thermoregulation. Rapid breathing or panting provides an avenue for heat loss, with each exhaled breath carrying heat away. The large nasal passages and expanded ribcage that enabled warming and humidifying cold-inspired air during rest could also have facilitated enhanced cooling through rapid ventilation during exertion. Though testing this hypothesis in extinct species is challenging, the brain, that most metabolically expensive organ, deserves special consideration. The human brain uses roughly 20% of the body's resting energy expenditure, despite being only about 2% of body weight. It's an energy hog, requiring constant glucose and oxygen delivery. A larger brain requires even more energy. Neanderthal brains were, on average, slightly larger than modern human brains. The average Neanderthal cranial capacity was around 1,410 cubic centimeters, compared to about 350 cubic centimeters for modern humans. That extra volume required extra energy, contributing to their overall high metabolic rate. But brain size isn't everything. Recent research has suggested that Neanderthal and modern human brains, while similar in overall size, were organized differently. Studies using CT scans and computational modeling indicate that modern humans have proportionally larger cerebellums, a part of the brain important for motor control, social cognition, and language processing. Neanderthals appear to have had larger occipital regions, the back part of the brain associated with visual processing. This organizational difference could relate to their environmental demands. Neanderthals lived at high latitudes where winter days are short and light levels are low. Enhanced visual processing capacity, supported by larger occipital regions with more neural tissue devoted to vision, would have provided adaptive advantages in low-light conditions. However, visual processing requires substantial energy. More brain tissue devoted to vision means more calories needed just to see effectively in dim conditions. Some researchers have proposed that the energy allocated to Neanderthal visual processing might have left less available for other cognitive functions. If total brain energy budgets have limits, and more resources are devoted to vision, this could theoretically constrain investment in other areas like social cognition and complex planning. This remains a topic of ongoing research and debate, representing one possible interpretation of how metabolic constraints might shape not just body form but brain function and cognitive capabilities. The energy demands of growth and development add another layer to the metabolic story. Young Neanderthals had to build those robust skeletons and develop those massive muscles while also fueling growth in body size. Evidence from dental development patterns and growth studies of juvenile specimens suggests that certain aspects of Neanderthal development may have followed different timelines than modern humans, though the picture is complex and not all developmental markers agree. Fast growth is metabolically expensive, requiring not just energy for the growing tissues but also all the cellular machinery involved in synthesis and assembly. The protein requirements alone for building muscle tissue are substantial. A growing Neanderthal child would have needed substantial caloric intake per unit body weight, potentially even higher than adults relative to their size, to support development of their robust skeletal and muscular systems. This has implications for Neanderthal society and survival. High offspring energy demands mean mothers need adequate nutrition not just during pregnancy, but throughout the extended period of childhood dependence. A hungry winter, a poor hunting season, any period of nutritional stress would hit children particularly hard. The combination of high individual metabolic needs and the demands of raising energy-hungry offspring may have kept Neanderthal populations small and vulnerable to environmental fluctuations. Let's talk about the flexibility of the Neanderthal metabolic system. Metabolism isn't static. Your body can adjust its metabolic rate based on food availability, temperature, activity level. During times of abundance, you might store energy as fat. During scarcity, you burn those reserves and may reduce your metabolic rate to conserve energy. But there are limits to metabolic flexibility. You can only reduce your BMR so far before essential functions are compromised, and in cold climates, reducing metabolic heat production can be fatal. Neanderthals likely had limited ability to lower their metabolism during food scarcity, because doing so would compromise their thermoregulation. This created a potentially vulnerable situation. Modern humans, with our more gracile bodies and lower BMRs, could theoretically weather periods of food scarcity better than Neanderthals. We require less food at baseline, which means we can survive on reduced rations for longer periods. Our bodies can shut down non-essential functions and reduce metabolic rate to a degree that Neanderthals, who needed to maintain thermogenesis, might not have been able to match without risking hypothermia. Whether this metabolic vulnerability actually contributed to Neanderthal extinction remains debated among researchers. One hypothesis suggests that when modern humans entered Europe, bringing more efficient hunting technologies and different foraging strategies, they may have been able to outcompete Neanderthals not necessarily through direct violence, but by depleting game populations to levels where Neanderthals struggled to meet their higher metabolic needs. This interpretation is supported by evidence of overlapping ranges and contemporaneous occupation, though proving causation remains challenging. There's also the question of metabolic efficiency. Not all bodies are equally efficient at converting food into useful work. Some individuals, some populations are more efficient, extracting more usable energy from a given amount of food. Others are less efficient, requiring more food to accomplish the same tasks. Neanderthals, with their emphasis on power and thermogenesis, may have been less metabolically efficient than modern humans. The fast-twitch muscles, while powerful, are less fuel-efficient than slow-twitch muscles. The emphasis on heat production, essential for survival in Ice Age Europe, meant burning calories for warmth that modern humans, adapted to Africa's warmth, didn't need to expend. This inefficiency had costs but also benefits. The same metabolic characteristics that made Neanderthals expensive to maintain also made them capable of surviving conditions that would kill less robust beings. It's a classic evolutionary trade-off. You can optimize for efficiency or for power and robustness, but generally not both simultaneously. The integration of all these metabolic systems, the elevated BMR, the potential BAT, the high-calorie diet, the robust respiratory and cardiovascular systems, the thermoregulatory mechanisms, created a being that was essentially a biological furnace. Neanderthals burned hot, burned bright, required enormous amounts of fuel, but in return generated tremendous power and survived in conditions we can barely imagine. But all this power, all this metabolic intensity, all this biological engineering, it all served a purpose. Neanderthals weren't bodybuilders admiring their physiques in cave pool reflections. They were predators, hunters, beings who needed every bit of their power to secure the food that fueled that power. Their entire physical package, skeleton, muscles, metabolism, was optimized for one crucial behavior: hunting. And not just any hunting. A specific, dangerous, brutally physical style of hunting that required everything their bodies could deliver. Section 4. The hunting machine. Biomechanics of a predator. Everything we've discussed so far, the dense bones, the massive muscles, the elevated metabolism, all of it comes together in understanding Neanderthals as hunters. This is what they were built for. This is why natural selection favoured robust skeletons and powerful musculature and metabolic intensity. Because in the environments where Neanderthals lived during the time periods they existed, hunting was life, and Neanderthal hunting wasn't the long-distance pursuit. Hunting of African plains wasn't the sophisticated projectile weapons of later modern humans. It was something more primal, more physical, more dangerous. It was ambush predation at its most brutal. Let's start by understanding the prey. Neanderthals hunted large game almost exclusively. Isotope analyses, examining the ratios of different carbon and nitrogen isotopes in Neanderthal bones, placed them at the top of the food web, obtaining protein from the same trophic level as wolves and cave lions. They were eating apex predators' food, which means they were hunting the same animals those predators hunted. Horses, bison, reindeer, red deer, wild boar, even occasionally mammoth and woolly rhinoceros. These weren't small animals. An adult horse can weigh 400 to 600 kilograms. Bison can exceed 900 kilograms. These are powerful, dangerous animals with hooves that can shatter bones, horns that can gore, mass that can crush. Hunting them without projectile weapons, without bows or atlatls or firearms, requires getting close, very close. Touch them with a stick close. The evidence for Neanderthal hunting strategies comes from multiple sources. Archaeological sites show concentrations of butchered animal remains, mortality profiles indicating which age groups were hunted, and the locations of kill sites revealing the tactics employed. One particularly compelling site is Neumarkt Nord in Germany, dating to around 120,000 years ago. At Neumarkt Nord, researchers found bones of large fallow deer bearing cut marks consistent with butchery, but also showing something more interesting: lesions, impact marks from weapons. Detailed analysis using microscopy and ballistic experiments confirmed these were hunting lesions, wounds inflicted by wooden spears. But here's the crucial detail. The angle and depth of the wounds indicate low-velocity impacts, not thrown spears, but thrust spears. The hunters had to get within arm's reach and drive the spear into the animal by hand. This is confirmed by other evidence. The design of Neanderthal spears, based on the few preserved examples and the stone points attached, to them suggests weapons optimized for thrusting rather than throwing. They're heavier, thicker than later projectile weapons, and Neanderthal anatomy itself, the shoulder morphology, the arm leverage, the asymmetry patterns, all better match a thrusting strategy than a throwing one. Thrusting spears means close quarters hunting. You can't stand at safe distance and hurl projectiles at dangerous prey. You have to approach, get close enough to touch, and then drive a wooden shaft tipped with stone into the animal's body, with enough force to penetrate hide, muscle, and hopefully reach vital organs. This requires tremendous courage, exceptional timing, and yes, extraordinary physical power. The biomechanics of spear thrusting help us understand why Neanderthals needed their particular body plan. A thrust isn't just an arm movement, it's a full body motion starting from the ground and working up through a kinetic chain. Your feet push against the ground, transferring force through your legs. Your hips rotate, adding rotational momentum. Your core muscles, abs and obliques and back muscles torque your torso. Your shoulder drives forward, your chest muscles contract, your triceps extends your arm, and at the end of that chain of muscular contractions, the spear tip accelerates into the target. The shorter lower legs that made Neanderthals less suited for distance running become advantages here. Those short, thick tibiae and fibulae provided a stable base, powerful push-off capability, the foundation of the kinetic chain. The broad pelvis enhanced stability, ensuring power wasn't lost to lateral sway or twisting. The bell-shaped ribcage housing powerful core muscles provided the rotational force that adds so much power to a thrust. The massive upper body muscles, the deltoid, the pectorals, the triceps, all optimized for generating maximum pushing force. The robust shoulder joints capable of handling the reaction forces when the spear tip impacts the target. The strong hands gripping the spear shaft, keeping it on target, controlling it even as the animal twists and struggles, and crucially, the fast-twitch muscle fibers generating explosive force. A spear thrust isn't a sustained push. It's an explosion of power over a fraction of a second. Fast-twitch fibers excel at this. They can generate maximum force almost instantaneously. The Neanderthal emphasis on power over endurance makes perfect sense in this context. But getting close enough to thrust a spear into a large, alert, dangerous animal isn't easy. You can't just walk up to a horse or bison and stab it. It will run, and despite their powerful sprinting capabilities, Neanderthals probably couldn't run down a fleeing horse in open terrain. They needed a different approach: enter-ambush tactics. Archaeological evidence suggests Neanderthals were masters of using terrain to their advantage. They identified locations where animals could be funneled, trapped, disadvantaged. Narrow valleys, blind corners, cliff edges, water crossings, anywhere the animal's natural movement patterns brought them into constrained spaces where escape was difficult. Multiple kill sites show this pattern. At Moran in France, researchers found the remains of approximately 4,000 bison processed over many years, potentially spanning several centuries of repeated use. The site is located at a natural choke point where migrating herds would pass through a narrow area between rocky outcrops. The topography created a natural funnel. Neanderthals positioned themselves at strategic points, waiting for herds to enter the constrained space, then launching coordinated attacks when escape routes were limited. The bone assemblage at Moran shows interesting patterns. The bison killed were primarily prime adults, animals in their physical peak. This selective hunting pattern, repeated over many occupations, suggests Neanderthals weren't just attacking whatever animals they encountered. They were choosing specific individuals within herds, targeting the ones that would provide the best meat yield despite being the most dangerous to hunt. At Salzgitter-Lebenstedt in Germany, a different pattern emerges. This site, dating to about 55,000 years ago, contains the remains of dozens of reindeer, all killed during early autumn. The evidence suggests these reindeer were intercepted during their annual migration, attacked at a predictable location and time of year. The Neanderthals who used this site understood reindeer behaviour, knew when and where the herds would pass, and positioned themselves to exploit this knowledge year after year. The butchery patterns at Salzgitter-Lebenstedt are particularly revealing. The reindeer were systematically processed. Every carcass shows cut marks indicating removal of meat, hide and tendons. Bones were broken for marrow, but interestingly, not every carcass was completely processed. Some individuals were fully butchered, others only partially. This suggests the Neanderthals killed more animals than they could fully process immediately, taking the best parts and leaving the rest. In Poland, horse remains at Zwolen present another variation of ambush hunting. The site is located where a grassy floodplain narrows between a river and steep cliffs. The horse bones, dating to around 120,000 years ago, represent mostly young adults and mature adults, a prime-dominated mortality profile. The interpretation is that horse herds, moving along the floodplain, were driven or naturally funneled toward the narrows. When escape options were limited by geography, Neanderthals attacked from multiple directions, bringing down multiple animals in a single hunt. The Côte de Saint-Brelade site on Jersey, an island off the coast of France, presents perhaps the most dramatic evidence of Neanderthal hunting strategy. At this site, two distinct layers contain massive accumulations of mammoth and woolly rhinoceros bones at the base of a steep ravine. The original interpretation suggested these bones represented drive hunting, where Neanderthals stampeded herds over the cliff edge, causing them to fall to their deaths below. This interpretation has been debated. Some researchers argue the bone assemblages could represent natural deaths or accumulated scavenging rather than active hunting. The density of bones, the ages of the animals, the butchery patterns, all these factors have been analysed and reanalysed. Current consensus suggests that while some of the accumulation might include naturally dead animals, there's strong evidence for at least some active hunting, potentially including driving animals toward the cliff edge during moments of panic. What's clear from all these sites is that Neanderthals weren't random opportunistic hunters. They used landscape features systematically. They understood animal behaviour. They planned their hunting activities based on seasonal patterns and geographic knowledge. This reveals sophisticated understanding of their environment, cognitive capabilities for planning and coordination, and the ability to transmit knowledge across generations. This reveals sophisticated understanding of animal behaviour, seasonal patterns, and landscape features. Neanderthals weren't mindlessly chasing prey. They were using knowledge accumulated over generations, understanding where and when prey would be vulnerable, positioning themselves to exploit that vulnerability. The actual moment of the hunt, the ambush itself, required coordinated group action. Evidence from multiple sites suggests Neanderthals hunted cooperatively. Bringing down a large animal, especially prime adults in their physical peak, isn't a solo endeavour. You need multiple hunters to surround the animal, to cut off escape routes, to attack from different angles. This is where Neanderthal power becomes crucial. When the moment comes, when the prey is trapped or cornered, when the hunters must commit, there's no room for hesitation. You have to move explosively, cover ground fast, drive your spear with maximum force. The powerful sprinting capabilities, the acceleration advantages of those short legs and long toes become decisive. And when you make contact, when the spear enters the animal, you have to maintain it. A wounded large animal is incredibly dangerous, possibly more dangerous than an unwounded one. It will thrash, try to escape, potentially charge its attackers. Holding onto the spear, keeping it in the wound, using it to guide or control the animal's movements, requires tremendous grip strength, upper body power, core stability. The injury patterns on Neanderthal skeletons confirm the dangers inherent in this hunting strategy. Studies examining trauma in Neanderthal remains found that an estimated 79 to 94% of specimens show evidence of healed major trauma. Let that sink in. Nearly every Neanderthal we've found experienced significant injury at some point in their life. Of those injured, individuals 37 to 52% suffered severe injuries, and 13 to 19% were injured before reaching adulthood. The distribution of these injuries is revealing. Head and neck trauma are common, suggesting impacts from animal hooves, horns, or falls. Upper body injuries, particularly the arms and shoulders, are frequent, consistent with close-quarters combat with prey. Rib fractures appear regularly, possibly from kicks or crushing. The pattern resembles what we see in modern rodeo riders and bull riders, individuals who regularly find themselves in close physical contact with large, powerful animals. Let's examine specific examples. The famous Shanidar 1 individual from Iraq mentioned earlier shows evidence of multiple severe injuries accumulated over a lifetime. His right arm was severely damaged in youth, probably from a crushing injury or severe fracture that didn't heal properly. The bone shows signs of infection, osteomyelitis, which may have necessitated amputation or may have simply resulted in a withered, useless limb. His left eye socket shows abnormalities suggesting vision problems. His right foot was damaged, causing an abnormal gait. Yet despite these debilitating injuries, he survived to an estimated 40 to 50 years of age, remarkable for a Neanderthal. His survival suggests his group cared for him, provided food and protection, allowed him to contribute in ways that didn't require full physical capability. La Chapelle-aux-Saints 1, that French skeleton discovered in 1908, shows evidence of severe arthritis affecting multiple joints, healed rib fractures, and dental abscesses. This individual, despite chronic pain and disability, lived to old age for a Neanderthal, perhaps 40 years or more. The skeleton demonstrates both the violence of Neanderthal life and the resilience of Neanderthal bodies in recovering from injury. Krapina, a site in Croatia that has yielded remains of multiple Neanderthal individuals, shows a high frequency of traumatic injuries. Cranial fractures, both healed and unhealed, appear on several specimens. Long bones show evidence of breaks that healed, sometimes with slight misalignment suggesting they healed without being properly set. The assemblage paints a picture of a population living hard lives, experiencing frequent injury, but often surviving these traumas. The comparison to modern rodeo riders has become something of a standard in Neanderthal research, and it's apt. Rodeo cowboys who spend their lives in close physical contact with large, powerful animals show similar patterns of frequent severe trauma. Study of rodeo rider injury patterns shows high rates of concussions, broken ribs, arm and shoulder injuries, exactly the pattern we see in Neanderthals. The difference is rodeo riders have modern medical care, pain management, surgical intervention. Neanderthals were healing from these injuries with nothing but their own robust biology and presumably some level of group care. The high trauma rates indicate just how dangerous Neanderthal hunting was. This wasn't safe, measured, low-risk hunting from distance with projectile weapons. This was repeatedly putting yourself in situations where powerful animals could and did cause serious injury. Only beings with the physical capabilities Neanderthals possessed, the strong bones that could heal after fractures, the robust bodies that could survive and recover from severe trauma, the group support systems that allowed injured individuals to survive could sustain this lifestyle. The foot and ankle biomechanics provide more clues about how Neanderthals moved during hunts. The talus, the ankle bone that connects the foot to the leg, shows distinctive features in Neanderthals compared to modern humans. Recent studies using trabecular bone analysis of Neanderthal found patterns consistent with high mechanical stress and powerful repetitive loading. The foot structure itself was well suited for varied terrain. Neanderthals lived in landscapes that were anything but flat and smooth. Ice Age Europe featured rocky terrain, steep slopes, uneven ground. The robust foot structure, the long toes providing extended ground contact, the strong ankle capable of stabilizing on irregular surfaces, all contributed to their ability to move confidently over difficult ground. This is important because ambush hunting often requires positioning yourself in places where prey won't expect predators. Steep slopes, rocky outcrops, anywhere that requires scrambling and climbing but provides tactical advantage. Being able to move over this terrain quickly and confidently, to position yourself before the prey arrives, to pursue them over broken ground, gave Neanderthals a crucial edge. The Achilles tendon deserves another mention here because it's central to understanding Neanderthal locomotion. In endurance runners, the Achilles acts like a spring, storing energy as the foot strikes the ground, and releasing it during push-off, making each stride more efficient. The long, compliant Achilles tendons of modern humans are optimized for this. but Neanderthal Achilles tendons, attached to those longer heel bones, were longer and probably less efficient as springs. This is a disadvantage for distance running, but an advantage for acceleration and power movements. A longer Achilles provides more leverage for the calf muscles, allowing them to generate more force, particularly useful for explosive push-offs, sudden direction changes, powerful jumps. Think about the movements required during an ambush hunt. You're waiting, motionless, conserving energy. The prey approaches. Suddenly you have to move, fast, explosive acceleration from a static position. Sprint across uneven ground. Possibly jump or leap to position yourself. Drive forward with maximum force as you thrust your spear. The Neanderthal leg and foot design is optimized for exactly these movements. The cooperative nature of Neanderthal hunting has implications beyond just tactics. Cooperation requires communication, coordination, and understanding of roles and timing. The extent to which Neanderthals use spoken language remains a subject of ongoing research and debate among anthropologists. What's clear from the archaeological evidence is that they successfully coordinated complex group activities, whether through spoken language, gestures, or other signaling systems. The fossil record demonstrates they worked together effectively enough to bring down dangerous prey repeatedly. This level of coordination suggests social intelligence and the cognitive capacity to understand others' intentions, work together toward common goals, and presumably share the results of successful hunts. The social and cognitive demands of cooperative hunting may have been as important as the physical demands in shaping Neanderthal capabilities, though determining the precise nature of their communication systems from archaeological evidence remains challenging. The selectivity of Neanderthal hunting adds another layer of sophistication. Analysis of animal remains at various sites shows that Neanderthals often targeted prime adults, animals in their physical peak. This is the opposite of what most predators do. Wolves, lions, hyenas, they typically target young, old, sick or injured animals, the individuals easiest to catch and kill. Hunting prime adults is harder, but provides better nutritional return. A healthy adult animal has more meat, more fat, better quality resources than a juvenile or elderly individual. But taking down a prime adult requires more force, more risk. Only hunters confident in their capabilities would consistently target the most dangerous prey. Some sites show different patterns, with mixed age groups or young individuals predominating. This suggests Neanderthals employed different strategies depending on circumstances. When possible, selective ambushes targeting specific individuals. When opportunity arose, non-selective ambushes catching whatever animals were present. Encounter hunting, coming across prey and attacking opportunistically. The variety of strategies indicates tactical flexibility, the ability to adapt approach based on terrain, prey behavior, hunting party composition. This cognitive flexibility combined with physical power made Neanderthals effective predators across diverse environments and prey species. We should also consider what happened after the kill. Butchering a large animal isn't simple. It requires strength to manipulate heavy carcasses, to break joints, to remove hides. The cut marks on animal bones from Neanderthal sites show they were thorough butchers, accessing all available resources, cracking bones for marrow, removing meat systematically. The power required for butchery shouldn't be underestimated. Try to imagine hand processing a 500-kilogram horse carcass with stone tools, rolling the body, positioning it for access to different cuts, separating limbs. Everything requires significant force. The Neanderthal musculature, particularly the upper body and core strength, made this possible. Transport of meat and resources back to living sites presented another physical challenge. Carrying heavy loads over distance and terrain requires endurance certainly, but also pure carrying capacity. The ability to hoist a quarter of a bison onto your shoulders and carry it kilometers back to camp requires back strength, leg strength, core stability. Neanderthal bodies were built for this. Interestingly, some evidence suggests Neanderthals didn't transport everything. At some kill sites, certain skeletal elements are absent, suggesting selective transport. They might fully butcher the animal on site, then take only the best cuts, leaving less valuable portions behind. This is logical when every kilogram you carry costs energy, and your metabolic demands are already high. The seasonal nature of prey availability added another dimension to Neanderthal hunting. Some animals, like reindeer, migrated seasonally. Others had rutting seasons when males became more accessible and aggressive, Fish spawned at predictable times. Plant foods ripened in cycles. Neanderthals had to time their activities to exploit these patterns. This required memory, planning, understanding of long-term patterns. When to be at the reindeer crossing, when the salmon would run, when the nuts would be ready for gathering. This kind of temporal awareness, coupled with the physical capability to exploit these opportunities when they arose, defined successful Neanderthal groups. There's one more aspect to consider: interactions with other predators. Neanderthals weren't the only large predators in Ice Age Europe. Cave lions, some of the largest lions ever to exist, hunted the same prey Neanderthals did. Cave hyenas, incredibly powerful scavengers and hunters, competed for resources. Cave bears, though primarily herbivorous, were massive and dangerous when threatened. Wolves hunted in packs. Neanderthals had to defend their kills from these competitors. Intriguingly, cave lion remains found at some Neanderthal sites show butchery marks, suggesting the bones were processed, with the claws and pelts apparently valued based on how they were removed. Whether Neanderthals actively hunted these apex predators or scavenged them opportunistically continues to be investigated. Regardless, the evidence indicates they interacted with and processed some of the most dangerous animals of their world, suggesting considerable confidence and capability in dealing with large carnivores. The comparison to modern humans is instructive. Early modern humans who entered Europe brought different hunting strategies. They developed atlatls, spear throwers that extended range and leverage, allowing them to attack from safer distances. Later, they invented the bow, enabling hunting from even further away. They employed different tactics, with some evidence suggesting emphasis on endurance hunting in more open terrain, running down prey over long distances rather than relying primarily on ambush. These modern human strategies may have involved lower risk per hunting event. They also required different physical characteristics, emphasis on endurance over raw power, lighter builds for efficient long-distance movement, different metabolic profiles optimized for sustained effort rather than explosive bursts. Modern human bodies, our bodies, show adaptations for different hunting strategies than those Neanderthals employed. Neither strategy is inherently superior in all contexts. Both worked in appropriate environments and circumstances. However, when climates changed, when competition for resources increased, when environmental conditions became more variable, the differences in these strategies may have had consequences for survival. The high-risk, high-cost Neanderthal approach, so successful for hundreds of thousands of years, may have become more difficult to sustain under changing conditions, though the exact factors leading to Neanderthal extinction remain subjects of ongoing research and debate. The biomechanics of Neanderthal hunting, the integration of skeletal structure, muscular power, metabolic capacity and behavioral strategy, represents a remarkable adaptation. For their time and place, they were exceptionally well designed. They were highly effective predators, capable of bringing down prey that would pose serious challenges to modern hunters, even with advanced technology. Evolution optimizes for the environment that exists during selection. Adaptations that prove advantageous under one set of conditions can become less favorable when circumstances change. Neanderthal power, so advantageous during stable glacial periods, may have become more costly when climates shifted, when resources fluctuated, when more technologically flexible modern humans arrived with different strategies and tools. The hunting capabilities that defined Neanderthals, all that biological engineering, all that power and physical capability, persisted successfully for approximately 200,000 years before their disappearance around 40,000 years ago. That represents one of the longer runs for any human species, a testament to the effectiveness of their adaptations during the Pleistocene. For 200 millennia, they survived conditions we can barely imagine, hunted megafauna with wooden spears and raw physical capability, and the legacy remains. In those of us with European and Asian ancestry, there's Neanderthal DNA, 1 to 4% of our genome coming from them. Some of those genetic variants affect traits like skin color, hair texture, immune function. Others may affect muscle fiber types, bone density, metabolic characteristics. The Neanderthal power, while diminished, isn't entirely gone. It echoes through our DNA, a reminder of what human bodies are capable of achieving. Conclusion. The legacy of power. We've journeyed through Neanderthal anatomy, from their dense skeletal fortress through their muscular engine. from their metabolic furnace to their expression as the ultimate hunting machine. We've seen how every aspect of their biology integrated into a coherent whole, are being optimized for power, for survival in harsh conditions, for a lifestyle that would destroy us. The picture that emerges is humbling. These weren't primitive humans, weren't failed experiments. They were supremely adapted, successful for approximately 200,000 years, beings who, in terms of raw physical capability, possessed advantages we no longer have. The skeletal robusticity, those bones that could handle substantially greater loads than ours, the metabolism adapted for extreme cold survival, all of it represents impressive achievements of human anatomical adaptation optimized for power and environmental resilience. But it also represents the constraints of biological specialization. Neanderthals were so well adapted to their specific ecological niche that when conditions changed, when their niche disappeared, they couldn't adapt quickly enough. Their high metabolic demands, their dependence on large game, their power over efficiency design, these became disadvantages when facing more flexible, more efficient modern humans. There's a lesson here about evolution, about adaptation, about the trade-offs inherent in biological design. You can't optimize for everything simultaneously. Neanderthals chose, or rather natural selection chose for them, power and robustness. We chose efficiency and flexibility. Both strategies worked in their contexts. Only one survived the test of changing circumstances. But should we pity Neanderthals? Should we consider them failures? Hardly. They survived longer than modern Homo sapiens has existed so far. They thrived in conditions we avoid. They accomplished things we couldn't, living off the land without technology, surviving winters without modern heating, hunting megafauna without projectile weapons. And they're not entirely gone. That genetic legacy, those fragments of their DNA still carried by billions of humans, means part of them persists. Studies have identified Neanderthal genetic variants in modern non-African populations that affect various traits. Some variants influence immune system function, with research suggesting certain Neanderthal genes may enhance response to particular pathogens. Other Neanderthal DNA segments have been associated with traits like skin and hair characteristics, and researchers continue investigating whether some variants might affect traits like pain tolerance or cold adaptation, though establishing definitive links between ancient genetic variants and complex modern traits remains challenging. The Neanderthal power, while not present in its full ancestral glory, shaped us more than we realized until genomic science revealed their genetic contribution. We are, in a very real sense, part Neanderthal. Their adaptations, their capabilities, their 200,000 years of evolution in Ice Age Europe contributed to the modern human genome. There's also a contemporary lesson. Modern humans have lost approximately 40% of the bone mass and muscle strength we once possessed. We've become gracile, lighter, weaker over the past 12,000 years, and especially over the past millennium. This isn't some abstract evolutionary change. It has real consequences. Osteoporosis, fractures from minor falls, the general fragility of modern human skeletons, these stem partly from our disconnection from the physical demands our bodies evolved to handle. We don't need to be as strong as Neanderthals. Our world doesn't demand that, and the metabolic costs would be prohibitive. But perhaps there's a middle ground between Neanderthal robusticity and modern fragility. Understanding what our bodies are capable of, what they evolved to do, might inform better approaches to health, fitness, and lifestyle. The study of Neanderthals reminds us that we are animals, biological beings shaped by evolutionary forces, carrying legacies from our ancestors. It challenges our human exceptionalism, showing us beings who in many physical regards surpassed us. But it also highlights what makes us unique, our flexibility, our capacity for cultural adaptation, our ability to modify our environment rather than being solely modified by it. As we close tonight's exploration, I want you to think about something. Somewhere in Ice Age Europe, 40,000 years ago, a Neanderthal stood in the cold dawn, hefting a wooden spear, preparing to hunt. The breath misted in frigid air, muscles massive and powerful, coiled with potential energy, bones dense and strong, ready to absorb the impacts to come, a metabolism running hot, generating warmth, powering that body through another day of survival. That Neanderthal was human as you or me, just expressing human potential in a different configuration. Understanding them helps us understand ourselves, the full range of what human bodies can be, the deep history we carry in our bones and genes. Before you go, if you enjoyed this deep dive into human evolution and physical capability, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content exploring the mysteries of our past. Drop a comment telling me what aspect of Neanderthal biology fascinated you most, or what extinct human species you'd like to hear about next. Your engagement helps this channel grow and tells me what content resonates with you. Until next time, remember, we are the descendants of survivors, carrying within us the genetic legacy of multiple human species, adapted for challenges we no longer face but capable of more than we often realize. The Neanderthals may be gone, but their power echoes through time, a testament to what human bodies can achieve when evolution demands it. Thanks for joining me tonight. Stay curious, stay questioning, and I'll see you in the next video.